All right, this is a short video to talk about how you conduct analysis in history EE, or IA. Not true for all subjects, but in history the EE and the IA are essentially the same. The difference is just a matter of size and scope. I'm going to be using the Pocket Guide to talk about this and referring to it a lot. You should all have it, and it is essential, I think, to writing a good history EE. What you want to do is avoid writing a narrative, or a report, so to speak, relating some facts. That will get you a D at best. You want a paper that is analytical, and the way to do that, you're sort of conducting a history experiment, and the way to make that experiment analytical is to set up the experiment with a good question. All right, basic who, what, when, where, why questions. These are questions that elicit the facts or specific factual evidence. Who was the King of England during the American Revolution? Where did the U.S. drop the first atomic bomb? These sort of fact-based questions are not going to be the sort of question you would want for your EE because they don't offer any analysis. Unless it's, who killed JFK? What really happened? But generally, these kind of questions are not conducive to analysis. Rather than asking these simplistic questions, ask questions that analyze the relationship between historical facts. And they could examine one of the following three areas. First, the historical context. A good question might be, how were the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, both published in 1776, related? Because you're asking how is the historical context of that year informing both these documents? How are these documents perhaps informing the historical context? Nothing happens in a vacuum. You might also ask questions related to cause and effect relationships. A good question might be, to what extent were the actions of the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank in 1929 to 1932 a cause of the Great Depression? Actually, the efforts of the Federal Reserve Bank were a cause of the Great Depression. They turned a recession into a Great Depression, and you're asking, to what degree is that true, and how did that happen? That's a good question. Cause and effect. Third category, continuity and change. An example might be, how did the longbow affect the institution of feudalism in 14th century Western Europe? History doesn't repeat itself because at various points in time, things stop being done and new things start being done. Continuity and change. The interplay between these two could also make for good analysis. Once you have a good question, which is going to really facilitate having good analysis, you need a research plan. In planning your strategy, you should consider what information you will need at each stage of the process, what sources you will need to consult in order to acquire that information, where you can find those sources, how much time you will need to allow for the research to answer the question you've chosen. You're going to kind of want to say, here's how I'm going to do my experiment. Here's how I'm going to answer my question. Once you begin accumulating sources, you want to evaluate those sources using the process called OPVL. What is the origin? What is the purpose? What is the value? What are the limitations of this source? You'll certainly apply this to primary sources. To secondary sources, you're also going to want to look at, for instance, the origin. You want to consider, who is the author? What are his or her academic credentials? Who is the publisher? Is it a scholarly press or a popular one? A lot of different questions you're going to want to use to evaluate your sources, because if you're reading a source about the Holocaust in Poland and it's written by a Polish Jew, it's not necessarily wrong or biased, but that's something you want to note. You want to read your sources interactively. You want to write as you read. Annotate heavily, underline or highlight important points, particularly or at least topic sentences and theses. Talk back to the text by making notations in the margin. Look up unfamiliar words. Write summaries of your reading. Copy out, in quotation marks, any truly striking phrases or statements. Ideally, you should keep a research journal to record ideas, insights, or questions, and or perhaps a note card system for every piece of evidence that you extract from your sources. Finally, you're going to collect and analyze all the evidence from your reading, and you're probably going to develop a working thesis, a potential answer to your question. But you should repeatedly ask questions. Ask, so what? Especially in relation to context, cause and effect, or continuity and change. And it's a good idea, if you can, to incorporate your evaluation of your sources into your analysis where appropriate. X says this, but note the limitation of X that I have documented earlier. These are the keys to a good analytical paper in history.